Close your eyes and imagine a slow dawn spreading across a wide ribbon of water. The Nile steady and eternal glimmers in the first light. Its annual floods leave behind rich, dark soil that made possible one of the longest-lasting civilizations the world has ever known. Along its banks, reeds sway gently, farmers begin their daily work, and in the distance the silhouette of stone monuments breaks the horizon. This was Egypt, a land that endured for over 3,000 years, where every grain of sand, every rising sun, and every turn of the river carried the weight of both life and the divine. The Nile was the spine of Egypt, the line along which people settled, harvested, and prayed. Without its yearly flood, Egypt could not have survived. But with it, this river valley became a cradle of stability in a world otherwise shaped by shifting deserts. It allowed villages to flourish into cities and cities into kingdoms. Over time, these kingdoms came under the rule of a single leader, the Pharaoh whose presence would dominate the imagination of his people for millennia. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt was not simply a political act. It was seen as the harmonizing of two halves of the cosmos itself. To the Egyptians, the Pharaoh was not only a king, but a living god who held the balance of the universe in his hands. His crown reflected this unity, the tall white crown of Upper Egypt joined with the red crown of Lower Egypt. To wear this combined headdress was to embody the whole of the Nile Valley. The Pharaoh stood as the earthly incarnation of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, and at the same time he was the son of Ra, the sun god. In his person, heaven and earth converged. It is difficult for us today to grasp the scope of that belief. To an Egyptian, the Pharaoh was not simply powerful. He was the axis around which life itself turned. His role was to uphold Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order, balance, and truth. If he ruled wisely, the Nile would flood at the right time, crops would grow, and enemies would be defeated. If he faltered, chaos threatened to spread across the land. This vision of sacred kingship gave Egypt a sense of stability unmatched in the ancient world. Other empires rose and fell in centuries. Egypt persisted for millennia. From 3100 BCE, when the first dynasties emerged, to 30 BCE, when Cleopatra's death brought the land under Roman rule, pharaohs continued to embody that ideal of divine kingship. They were mortal, yes, but their lives were framed by rituals and monuments designed to transcend mortality itself. Imagine the earliest kings at Abydos, whose tombs still whisper of the first steps toward eternity. Their names carved in hieroglyphs, their bodies buried with attendants to serve them beyond death. Imagine the gradual rise of stone temples along the riverbank, each dedicated to gods, yet also to the glory of the ruler who built them. Each structure, from the mud brick mastabas of the Old Kingdom to the soaring pylons of Karnak, spoke not just of power, but of an unbroken faith that life and death were part of a larger eternal rhythm. For ordinary Egyptians, life was simple yet deeply connected to this cosmic order. Farmers tilled their land, artisans carved and painted, and priests tended temples. Yet in every action, there was an awareness that the pharaoh's presence touched all. When they harvested grain, they thanked the gods, but also recognized the pharaoh as guarantor of fertility. When they marched in military campaigns, it was his divine essence that protected them. So Egypt rose along the Nile, not just as a land of fertile soil and water, but as a vision of cosmic harmony embodied in one figure. The pharaoh was the bridge between human and divine, the eternal reminder that order could triumph over chaos. As the centuries rolled on, that vision would inspire stone monuments of unimaginable scale, rituals of extraordinary devotion, and a fascination with death and eternity that still captures us today. And so as the sun settles fully upon the valley, casting gold across its fields, you can feel the sense of permanence that defined Egypt. The Nile flows endlessly, the pharaoh sits enthroned, and Ma'at, the order of all things, holds steady. In this quiet balance, civilization took root and began its long journey into history. As evening light softens over the Nile, we turn from the river to the works it inspired. The Egyptians were not only farmers and worshippers, they were inventors, builders, and record keepers. Their legacy is found not only in towering pyramids, but in the smaller, everyday tools and systems that shaped the rhythm of life. One of the greatest gifts they left to the world was writing. The earliest hieroglyphs appeared on tombs and temple walls, intricate symbols representing sounds, words, and ideas. To read them was to step into a world where the sacred and the practical intertwined. On the one hand, scribes recorded harvests, taxes, and decrees. On the other, they carved prayers and hymns designed to carry the soul into eternity. These writings were not simply marks on stone, they were living spells binding the past, present, and future together. Beside writing, the Egyptians created a calendar remarkable for its precision. They divided the year into 365 days arranged in 3 seasons that reflected the life-giving cycle of the Nile inundation, planting, and harvest. This calendar guided farmers' temple rituals and state affairs. It also reminded everyone that time itself was woven into the cosmic order, a rhythm overseen by both the gods and the pharaoh. Their tools, too, carried the mark of ingenuity. Ox-drawn plows tilled the soil, sailboats carried goods along the river, and craftsmen learned to quarry and shape stone with a skill that still astounds. They worked copper, and later bronze, they baked bricks, and they wove linen that clothed both peasants and kings. Even the simplest household jar or amulet reflects a culture where function and symbolism blended. But it was in stone that their genius most fully revealed itself. Across the land, monuments rose like eternal prayers. Consider the great temples at Karnak and Luxor, where rows of colossal columns hold aloft roofs that seem to defy gravity. The walls of these sanctuaries are covered with scenes of offerings, battles, and rituals, each figure carefully aligned to tell the story of divine kingship. To walk among them even today is to feel the weight of thousands of years pressing close. Or picture the necropolis of Abydos, where early dynastic kings were buried. Their tombs, modest by later standards, still proclaimed a belief that death was not an end, but a passage. Over centuries, tombs grew more elaborate, eventually blossoming into the pyramids of the Old Kingdom. These massive structures were not simply tombs. They were statements of permanence, symbols of order rising from the desert. Even their smaller inventions, from cosmetics to musical instruments, were tied to both beauty and sacredness. Coal-lined eyes not only for appearance, but also to protect from the sun. Harps and flutes echoed in ceremonies, their sounds rising toward the heavens. Papyrus scrolls carried hymns, stories, and wisdom across generations. The Egyptians understood that every object, every innovation, had a place in the great design of Ma'at. Nothing was purely practical. The calendar guided both crops and festivals. Hieroglyphs were both record and incantation. Stone was both material and memory. As night deepens over the Nile, imagine the glow of torches against carved reliefs. Priests chant in echoing halls, scribes bend over rolls of papyrus, and artisans chip away at limestone blocks destined for eternity. Their work was not only for their time, it was for all time. And through it, the civilization of Egypt left a mark so enduring that even in sleep we can feel its presence. Night settles softly over Egypt, and in the silence, the idea of kingship itself glows with something more than human light. To the ancient Egyptians, their ruler was not merely a man who held authority. He was a god who walked among them, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed sky god, and the chosen son of Ra, the sun god. The pharaoh's body was flesh, but his office was divine. When a man ascended the throne, his humanity did not vanish, but it was overlaid with something higher. He became a living vessel of Mayat, the principle of balance, order, and truth that kept the universe from slipping into chaos. This concept was so deeply woven into Egyptian life that every act of the pharaoh, from raising a temple to issuing a law, carried the weight of cosmic consequence. If the pharaoh was strong-wise, and just then Ma'at was secure. The Nile would flood in its proper season, the crops would thrive, the borders would hold against enemies. But if the pharaoh faltered, disorder might creep in. Floods could fail, famine might spread, or foreign powers could descend upon the land. The well-being of the entire kingdom rested on one figure seated on the throne, yet also hovering at the edge of divinity. To ordinary people, this was both reassuring and awe-inspiring. They could look upon their ruler as the pivot of the cosmos itself. In festivals, processions, or ceremonies, his presence was more than royal. It was sacred. His regalia made this visible. The double crown combined red and white to signal the unity of Upper and Lower Egypt. The crook and flail held across his chest symbolized both protection and authority. His golden throne, his jeweled collar, even the false beard he sometimes wore, each was not ornament, but a sign that the divine had taken human form. This god-king also bore responsibilities unlike any other. He was expected to lead armies in defense of Egypt's lands. He was also high priest of every temple, responsible for offerings to the gods, for rituals that kept the sun rising and the stars in place. He judged disputes, issued decrees, and oversaw vast building projects that reached into the desert sky. Each act reinforced the truth that the pharaoh was the mediator between gods and men. Yet beneath this aura, he remained a man. He felt hunger, he aged, he bled. This duality gave his role both grandeur and fragility. The Egyptians accepted that their ruler might be mortal, but they believed his soul, bound to Horus, continued through death into eternity. When one pharaoh died, the next took up the mantle, and with it, the same divine essence, as if the spirit of kingship itself passed unchanged from body to body. So the pharaoh was both living god and earthly king, a bridge between heaven and earth. His life was not his own, but a performance of cosmic duty. Every word, gesture, and decision reverberated far beyond palace walls. As sleep draws near, imagine the hush of a grand temple at dusk, the scent of incense rising, and the pharaoh stepping forward, his presence at once human and divine, the embodiment of an order older than memory. Morning light falls gently over the royal city, spilling across gardens, courtyards, and the great palace where the pharaoh dwells. Within those high walls, another day begins, not with haste, but with the careful rhythm of ritual. For in Egypt, even the dawn was sacred when it touched the life of the living God. Imagine the quiet corridors before sunrise. Servants move softly, preparing perfumes, linens, and food. Musicians wait with harps and flutes to greet the awakening king. When the pharaoh rises, he is not alone. Attendants are there to bathe him with water drawn from the Nile, considered sacred in itself. Oils of lotus and cedar are applied, their scents meant to purify body and spirit alike. Clothing is chosen not merely for comfort, but for meaning. Fine white linen, cool and smooth against the skin, symbolizes purity. Jeweled collars gleam with carnelian, lapis lazuli, and turquoise, each stone carrying its own protective power. The pharaoh's sandals, the crowns he may don, whether the white, the red, or the combined double crown. Each is part of a language of symbols telling his people and the gods who he is. Priests may chant as he dresses, whispering spells to guard him through the day. Every act, from the combing of his hair to the fastening of a belt, is layered with belief. Nothing is simple routine. Everything is charged with the task of keeping Ma'at in balance. Once adorned, the pharaoh steps into a smaller shrine within the palace to make morning offerings. Here he presents food, incense, and words to the gods, reaffirming that harmony holds. This is not done in haste, but with deliberate calm, as if the very rising of the sun waits upon the king's devotion. After these sacred beginnings, the day opens into public duty. Councils gather to report on state matters. Viziers present records of harvests, taxes, and petitions from distant provinces. Generals stand ready to discuss the defense of borders. Ambassadors or emissaries from other lands may bring tribute. Each matter flows before the pharaoh, and each decision he makes is more than governance. It is a reaffirmation of order itself. But the morning also carries moments of spectacle. From time to time, the pharaoh may appear in processions through temple courtyards, attended by guards, priests, and nobles. Ordinary people glimpse him, then raised high, shimmering with gold and linen, a figure both near and beyond reach. For most, this brief sight is the only time they will ever lay eyes on their ruler. And yet in this single vision, they see both man and God. To them, the pharaoh's walk, his gestures, even the way sunlight strikes his regalia, are not accidents. They are signs. Signs that the world holds steady, that the Nile will rise, that the gods are with them. By midday, he may retire for rest or counsel again. But the pattern of the day has already been set by those early rituals. Morning in the palace is not about luxury or leisure. It is about continuity, the assurance that the order of heaven and earth is renewed with each sunrise. As night comes again to your thoughts, picture the hush of that palace chamber, where incense hangs in the air, where chants weave softly through open doors, and where the pharaoh, freshly adorned, steps into the new day, not simply as a man, but as a living vessel of the gods. Life inside the palace did not unfold with spontaneity. Every gesture, every step, every moment was bound to layers of ritual and quiet superstition. To an outsider, these small acts might seem trivial. To the Egyptians, they were the threads that bound the pharaoh's day to the eternal fabric of Ma'at. Picture the pharaoh moving from chamber to chamber. He does not stride without thought. His right foot must always cross a threshold first. To do otherwise would risk imbalance, a subtle invitation to chaos. When he sits to eat, his attendants carefully arrange dishes. The left hand is never used carelessly. Certain foods must be touched with the right, others offered with both hands as a sign of reverence. In a society where the ruler embodied the balance of the cosmos, even shadows mattered. The shadow of a man, his shiat, as Egyptians called it, was considered part of his soul. To allow one's shadow to fall across a sacred statue, a priest or the king himself, could be dangerous, even sacrilegious. In palace halls and temple courts, careful thought was given not only to where people stood, but to where their shadows stretched in the sun. Ritual also shaped meals and rest. Bread, beer, vegetables, and meat were not only sustenance, but offerings in miniature. Spices and incense accompanied meals, the scents carrying prayers upward. When the pharaoh reclined, amulets were placed near him, charms to guard against unseen forces. Servants knew which oils to rub into his skin, not only for comfort, but for protection against ill spirits. These small habits, repeated endlessly, created a rhythm that reassured both ruler and people. They showed that order prevailed even in the tiniest details of life. To break the pattern was to risk inviting Isfet, the force of disorder, into the world. And so from dawn until dusk, palace life was stitched together by these invisible rules. For ordinary Egyptians, too, superstition shaped the day. Farmers whispered short prayers before sowing seed. Mothers hung amulets around their children's necks to keep them safe at night. But in the palace, such practices were amplified, multiplied, and woven into state ritual. The pharaoh, more than anyone, was expected to live in harmony with the unseen world. Imagine the hush of a banquet hall where laughter is subdued, where servers remember never to cross in front of the king, where every vessel and dish is aligned according to long tradition. Even the pharaoh's rest was guided by ritual. Special headrests supported his neck so that dreams believed to be messages from the divine could arrive unbroken. As you drift towards sleep, think of these tiny customs, quiet gestures repeated day after day. They were the heartbeat of a kingdom. Through them, the pharaoh's life unfolded like a carefully woven fabric, strong enough to keep chaos away. In these small rituals, Egypt held its cosmic order steady, one careful step, one whispered prayer, one shadow avoided at a time. The pharaoh's role did not end with rituals in the palace. Beyond the incense and amulets lay the vast machinery of the Egyptian state, a kingdom stretching from the delta marshes to the deserts of Nubia. To govern this land, the king wore not only sacred robes, but also the weight of earthly law. When he stepped into the audience chamber, the double crown upon his head signaled more than divine authority. It reminded all present that he ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt as one. The court assembled before him, viziers, generals, scribes, and priests, each awaiting his word. The vizier was the pharaoh's chief advisor, the voice of administration. He brought reports of harvest yields, the flow of taxes, and petitions from the people. Scribes unrolled papyrus scrolls filled with figures and symbols, records of the kingdom's lifeblood. Generals described border skirmishes or foreign envoys at the gates. In each case, the pharaoh listened, judged, and spoke. His word was final. His decision was law. Yet these were not merely human judgments. To the Egyptians, when the pharaoh ruled, the gods themselves ruled through him. His decrees carried the force of the divine. To disobey was not just rebellion against the state, but sacrilege. Justice, or mayat, extended from the stars above to the court chamber floor, flowing through the pharaoh's voice. Festivals reinforced this truth. When the king appeared in processions, his people knelt not only before their sovereign, but before a living God. The offerings he made in temples were more than ritual. They were acts that renewed the very bonds between Egypt and the divine realm. Without them, the sun might falter in its rising, or the Nile refuse to flood. The duties of rule were endless. There were canals to maintain, granaries to fill, armies to command, and temples to raise. At times, the pharaoh might leave the palace to oversee great building works. He might inspect the laying of a temple foundation, or dedicate a statue of himself as eternal guardian of the land. His presence sanctified the work, linking stone and labor to the balance of the cosmos. But governance also meant listening. From time to time, the pharaoh heard petitions directly from common people. A farmer might complain of stolen livestock. A widow might seek redress for land wrongly taken. In such moments, the king was not distant or aloof. He was the ultimate judge, the earthly guarantor of fairness. His verdict, once spoken, could not be challenged. This blending of divine and political power gave Egyptian kingship its extraordinary stability. Other empires saw kings rise and fall in quick succession. Egypt endured because its ruler was more than a man, he was the axis of the world itself. And yet he bore the burden of that role. Every choice, every order was freighted with cosmic meaning. As you listen in quiet, picture the audience chamber at midday. The pharaoh seated attendants fanning gently, the vizier unrolling a papyrus of accounts. Priests murmur about omens, generals speak of distant borders, scribes await orders. Then the pharaoh raises his hand, speaks, and silence falls. His voice carries not just across the hall, but across the land, echoing through farms, temples, and deserts. To govern under the double crown was to carry a responsibility few could bear. It was to be mortal, yet treated as divine. It was to oversee men and stones, crops and stars, and it was to hold Egypt itself steady and whole in the fragile balance of Ma'at. Even a god-king required moments of rest. Yet in Egypt, leisure was never only leisure. Every pastime, every banquet, every hunt was layered with meaning, woven into the same cosmic fabric that shaped the pharaoh's daily rituals. Imagine the pharaoh standing in his chariot at the edge of the papyrus marshes. Horses snort in the morning air, attendants hold bows and quivers ready. The king takes up his own bow, its polished wood gleaming in the light. With practiced calm he draws and releases. An arrow flies into a startled flock of birds, or strikes the flank of a bounding gazelle. To onlookers this was more than sport. It was a symbolic act, the king taming the chaos of the wild, asserting order over the untamed world. Hunting, whether lions in the desert or fowl in the wetlands, affirmed the pharaoh's role as protector. Every successful strike echoed the eternal struggle against disorder. It reassured the people that their ruler's strength was not only ceremonial, but tangible, his arm steady, his aim sure. Inside the palace, leisure took other forms. Music drifted through banquet halls. Harps, lutes, and flutes filled the air with slow, lilting melodies. Dancers moved with graceful precision, their steps themselves a kind of ritual. Guests reclined while servants poured wine flavored with herbs and honey. Yet even here, pleasure carried a sacred undertone. The bounty of food and drink symbolized the blessings of the gods. The joy of music and movement reminded all that harmony prevailed under the pharaoh's reign. Games, too, carried layers of meaning. One of the most beloved was senet, played with a simple board of squares and small pieces moved by chance throws. To us, it might look like a pastime. To the Egyptians, senet mapped the soul's journey through the afterlife. Each move represented progress through trials and toward the eternal fields of peace. When a pharaoh played, he was not only passing the time. He was rehearsing in miniature the great journey that awaited him beyond death. Leisure could also include processions through gardens where lotus blossoms floated on still pools and palms cast cooling shade. In these serene walks, the pharaoh was surrounded by courtiers, musicians, and attendants, each reminding him and reminding themselves that even in moments of rest, the god-king was the axis of their world. So when we think of leisure, we must set aside images of idle relaxation. For a pharaoh, nothing was idle. Every banquet reaffirmed divine favor. Every hunt replayed the cosmic battle of order and chaos. Every game whispered of eternity. Even joy was a form of worship, a steadying of Ma'at in the quiet hours of the day. As you rest now, imagine the soft music of harps drifting across a lamplit hall. Imagine the rustle of linen garments, the scent of lotus rising from a bowl. In Egypt, even pleasure was solemn, even laughter part of the sacred pattern. The pharaoh's leisure, like his rule, was never his alone. It belonged to the order of the cosmos itself. When darkness fell upon Egypt, the pharaoh's duties did not vanish. The night, too, was filled with unseen currents, omens, and quiet rituals of protection. Sleep was not simple rest. It was a journey into a realm where God spoke and fate could be glimpsed. To the Egyptians, the soul was composed of many parts. Among them was the ba, often pictured as a bird with a human head, which could leave the body and sleep travel through the night and return at dawn. Each morning, the Bey's safe return mirrored the rising of the sun. For the pharaoh, this nightly cycle was more than personal. It echoed the eternal rebirth of Ra, the sun god, without which the world itself might falter. Dreams were not random. They were messages. A vision of water might foretell abundance. A dream of fire could warn of danger. There were even papyri dream books cataloging hundreds of possible visions and their meanings. Priests and scribes studied them closely, interpreting signs that might shape decisions in court or temple. The pharaoh's dreams carried special weight. They were not only glimpses of his own fate, but of Egypt's. In the hush of night, rituals guarded the king as he slept. Amulets of carnelian lapis or gold were placed near his bed. Incantations were whispered to ward off malevolent spirits. Servants tested food and drink even late at night to ensure no poison threatened him. The walls of the chamber might bear protective inscriptions, while loyal guards stood silently at the door, their spears gleaming in torchlight. Yet despite these precautions, the night could still bring unease. Enemies, both human and unseen, were thought to move most freely in darkness. Sorcerers might utter curses, rivals might plot, spirits might wander. The pharaoh, though divine, was also vulnerable. His safety was the safety of Egypt, and so the night watch was more than duty, it was sacred obligation. There are stories scattered through history of kings visited by dreams that shaped destiny. A dream of victory urging a campaign. A dream of the gods demanding new temples or offerings. One tale speaks of a young prince who fell asleep by the Sphinx and dreamed that the great stone lion promised him kingship if he would clear away the sands. When he awoke, he set men to work, and in time he did become king, fulfilling the vision whispered in the night. For the pharaoh, then, sleep was never ordinary. It was another realm of responsibility, another stage upon which order and chaos played their eternal game. His body might lie upon fine linens, perfumed and still, but his soul traveled, listened, and returned. Each dawn, when he rose again, the people could be certain the cycle was unbroken, Ma'at endured. As you drift deeper now, imagine the flicker of torches in a hushed chamber. Guards stand alert, priests murmur spells, the pharaoh rests beneath protective amulets. Outside, the desert night stretches wide and silent, but within a fragile calm holds. Even in dreams, the ruler of Egypt carried the burden of his people, keeping balance between the seen and unseen. Behind the high walls of Egypt's royal palace, life was not only rituals and ceremonies. It was also a world of shifting alliances, whispered rivalries, and tangled family ties. The pharaoh may have been a god-king, but within his household, he was surrounded by human ambitions, wives, children, courtiers, each with hopes, fears, and hidden schemes. The royal family was no ordinary family. To preserve the sacred bloodline, marriages often took place within its own branches. Sisters could become wives, daughters could be given in marriage to their fathers. To the Egyptians, this was not scandal, but duty, a way to keep divine essence pure. But such unions, while considered sacred, also created a labyrinth of jealousies. Queens vied for status. Concubines sought favor. Sons and daughters, some legitimate, others less so, grew up in a shadowed competition for the ultimate prized succession. Imagine the still corridors of the harem, where whispers carried through carved doorways. A queen might plot for her son's future, securing allies among priests or generals. Another might send gifts to scribes, ensuring her family's names were recorded favorably. In this world, affection and rivalry coexisted side by side. Love between siblings could turn into rivalry. A mother's devotion to her child could drive her to confront powerful enemies. History offers us glimpses of these struggles. Some queens, despite their beauty or wisdom, found themselves pushed aside when a rival rose higher in the pharaoh's favor. Some sons, though born into the royal household, were denied the throne because another line gained greater support. Even the most beloved consorts could be erased from temple walls if politics shifted. The palace was a place of music and fragrance, but also of unease. At banquets, smiles might conceal bitter calculations. In the gardens, a walk among lotus ponds might also be an opportunity for discreet negotiations. Servants carried trays, but also carried news from one chamber to another. Nothing was truly private. For the pharaoh, this web of power was both a resource and a danger. His queens and children were symbols of his wealth and vitality. Yet they were also potential sources of strife. A whispered rumor, a forged decree, or a sudden illness could alter the line of succession overnight. Still, even in this environment of intrigue, moments of tenderness existed. Pharaohs commissioned tombs for their queens or dedicated temples in their honor. They played with their children in palace courtyards, scenes sometimes preserved in delicate carvings. The royal family, for all its danger, was also a circle of intimacy and trust. A reminder that even in the shadow of divinity, human bonds persisted. As you drift into rest, imagine the palace not only as a place of power, but as a place of whispers, a web of voices, hopes, and rivalries that stretched through every hall. Behind the grandeur, the pharaoh and his family lived lives as fragile and complex as any their fates bound together in both love and competition. Among the many rulers of Egypt, one stands out with quiet defiance: Hatshepsut, the queen who became king. Her story is one of ambition, skill, and resilience unfolding over 2 decades in the 15th century BCE. Hatshepsut began as queen consort, married to her half-brother Thutmose II. When he died young, their son Thutmose III was too small to rule. By tradition, she was named regent, entrusted to guide the kingdom until the boy came of age. But Hatshepsut did not remain in the shadows. Slowly, step by step, she assumed the full powers of kingship. At first, she appeared alongside her stepson, her titles swelling with authority. Then she began to take on the symbols of the throne. She wore the royal headdress, the broad collar, even the false beard reserved for kings. Sculptors portrayed her not as a queen, but as a pharaoh, sometimes with a masculine torso, sometimes seated upon the throne with all the regalia of a god-king. In doing so, she rewrote the visual language of kingship itself. Hatshepsut's reign was not marked by war, but by prosperity and building. She sent expeditions down the Red Sea to the land of Punt, returning with incense, gold, and exotic treasures. She ordered temples and obelisks to be raised monuments that gleamed in the sun and proclaimed her right to rule. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, with its terraces rising gracefully against the cliffs, remains one of the most beautiful achievements of Egyptian architecture. Her leadership was not only practical, but shrewd. She understood that legitimacy required more than force. It required narrative. In inscriptions, she claimed that the god Amun himself had chosen her as ruler. Stories depicted her as divine from birth, destined to wear the crown. By weaving these claims into the fabric of religion, she ensured that her authority was seen as not just unusual, but sacred. For more than 20 years, Egypt flourished under her guidance. Trade expanded, temples thrived, and peace held steady. Yet her reign remained an exception. After her death, Thutmose III finally ruled alone, and in time her memory was attacked. Her name was chiseled from monuments, her statues destroyed or hidden. Later generations sought to erase her reign to restore kingship to its male form. But history did not forget. Her temple still stands, her obelisks still pierce the sky. Today we remember Hatshepsut as one of the most remarkable rulers of Egypt, a woman who defied tradition, who clothed herself in the regalia of men, and who proved that divine kingship could be reimagined. As you rest now, picture her temple terraces in the fading light, their columns casting long shadows across the cliffs. Imagine her statues serene and confident, their faces calm yet resolute. Hatshepsut's reign reminds us that even within the strict patterns of Egypt's past, change could come quiet, determined, and enduring. In the long chain of Egypt's rulers, one figure shines strangely apart: Akhenaten, the heretic king. His reign was brief by Egypt's standards, but the ripples of his choices lingered for centuries. Where others upheld tradition, he turned it upside down. Where others worshipped many gods, he declared only one. Before he changed his name, he was known as Amenhotep III, heir to a long line of rulers tied deeply to the god Amun. But soon after taking the throne, he began to break from that tradition. He proclaimed that the Aten, the radiant sun disk, was not just another deity among many, but the sole god of heaven and earth. To serve Aten was to serve life itself, for in the sun's rays lay all growth, warmth, and order. To honor his new vision, Amenhotep became Akhenaten, meaning devoted to the Aten. His transformation did not stop at words. He closed the temples of other gods, stripped their priests of power, and declared their images erased. Where the falcon of Horus once soared, and where Amun's name once echoed in hymns, only the blazing disk of Aten was allowed. A new city rose from the desert Akhetaten horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. There temples were open to the sky without roofs, so that the sun's rays could pour directly upon worshippers. Art itself changed under Akhenaten. The stiff, formal figures of earlier kings gave way to softer, elongated forms. The pharaoh appeared with narrow face-curved hips and slender limbs. Scenes showed him not in rigid poses, but in intimate moments, eating with his family, embracing his queen Nefertiti, or lifting his daughters tenderly. To many Egyptians, these changes must have been unsettling. The old gods were tied to every village, every harvest, every ritual of daily life. Now they were forbidden. The power of the priesthood of Amun, once so strong in Thebes, was shattered. Farmers and craftsmen were expected to give offerings only to Aten. The old balance of Ma'at seemed shaken. Yet for a time Akhenaten's devotion burned fiercely. In art and inscription he declared himself the sole prophet of Aten, the only mediator between God and people. The sun's rays reached down upon him, and his family ending in tiny hands that touched their faces, symbols of divine favor. But the experiment could not last. Akhenaten's reign endured just 17 years. After his death, the city of Amarna was abandoned, its temples left to the sand. The old gods returned in force, their names restored, their images raised again. Akhenaten's own name was struck from king lists, his monuments dismantled. Later generations called him the enemy and sought to erase his memory. Still, history has preserved him. The ruins of Amarna speak of his boldness. His strange statues puzzle scholars even today. His hymns to Aten carved in stone echo with an almost modern simplicity, a god of light, a source of life for all creatures. As you drift towards sleep, picture the sun sinking over desert cliffs, its rays stretching across the sands of Amarna. The city lies silent now, but once it rang with chants to Aten, once it glowed with devotion unlike anything before or after. Akhenaten's vision faded, but his defiance of tradition remains one of Egypt's most haunting chapters. If Akhenaten's reign was a blaze of disruption, what followed was a quiet restoration. Into this fragile moment stepped a boy frail in body, yet destined to become the most famous pharaoh of all, Tutankhamun. Born into the tangled web of Akhenaten's family, Tutankhamun carried both divine claim and mortal burden. His father was almost certainly Akhenaten. His mother may have been one of the king's own sisters, for the royal family's desire to keep bloodlines pure often turned inward. From birth, the young prince carried the consequences of such unions. His body was small, his health uncertain. Around the age of 9, he was placed upon the throne. A child, yet now the embodiment of Horus, the living god of Egypt. His advisors, powerful men like the Vizier Ai and the General Horemheb, guided him closely. They saw that Akhenaten's religious revolution had left the land unstable, the people uneasy, the priesthood resentful. Under their direction, the boy king's reign became one of restoration. Temples to Amun were reopened. The names of the old gods were spoken again in hymns. The capital shifted back from deserted Amarna to Thebes, where traditions still ran deep. Even Tutankhamun's name bore the mark of this reversal. He was first known as Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, but soon his name was changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, a public declaration that Egypt had returned to its ancient ways. Still, for the young king himself, life was difficult. His body showed signs of deformity. He walked with a cane, his spine and feet weakened by inherited conditions. He suffered illnesses that left him frail and vulnerable, yet he fulfilled his duties as best he could. He married Ankhesenamun, likely his half-sister, strengthening the royal line. He commissioned temples and monuments, even if modest compared to those of great builders before him. His reign was short, barely a decade. Around the age of 19, Tutankhamun died. The cause remains uncertain, perhaps a broken leg turned septic, perhaps malaria, perhaps a mix of frailty and accident. However it happened, Egypt lost a young ruler just as he had begun to step into his role. Yet in death he achieved what eluded him in life. His tomb, hidden in the Valley of the Kings, remained almost untouched for centuries. When discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter, it revealed a treasure beyond imagining: golden shrines, chariots, jewelry statues, and the now iconic golden mask. Suddenly, the boy king's face became known to the world. Tutankhamun's name, nearly lost to history, became eternal. Not because of conquests or great monuments, but because of chance, a tomb overlooked by robbers, preserved in silence until the modern age. His fragile body, swathed in gold and linen, continues to tell us stories through CT scans and DNA tests. His short, delicate reign speaks to the vulnerability behind the image of divine kingship. As you sink deeper into rest, imagine the tomb's quiet chambers, filled with the gleam of treasures meant to guide a young soul into eternity. Tutankhamun may have been frail, but his legacy endures stronger than stone. Through him, we remember that behind every crown was a mortal life, fragile and fleeting, yet preserved in memory for millennia. Among all of Egypt's rulers, one name still echoes with unmatched grandeur: Ramses II, remembered as Ramses the Great. His reign stretched for 66 years, long enough for a child to be born, grow old, and pass away, all under his rule. Few pharaohs left so deep a mark upon the land or upon the memory of history. From the moment he took the throne, Ramses sought to make his presence eternal. He did not only build temples, he raised entire cities. His capital, Pi-Ramesses, rose in the fertile delta, a city of palaces, gardens, and wide avenues. Everywhere his likeness appeared: colossal statues, carved from stone, towering over squares and temple courts. His name was etched into walls from Nubia to the Mediterranean. His building projects were not modest embellishments. At Karnak, he expanded the vast hypostyle hall, filling it with colossal columns that soared like a stone forest. At Abu Simbel, he carved temples directly into the cliffs, their facades guarded by 4 immense seated statues of himself. each gazing out across the desert with serene authority. These monuments were not only for worship, they were declarations Ramses was here, and Ramses would endure. He was also a warrior. His reign saw campaigns against the Hittites, a formidable power to the north. At the Battle of Kadesh, he clashed with their forces in one of the largest chariot battles of the ancient world. Though the outcome was uncertain, Ramses ordered inscriptions that told of his own courage, of how he stood alone against enemies, his strength blessed by the gods. Later, he signed one of history's earliest known peace treaties, a testament to diplomacy as well as war. Beyond battles and building, Ramses was a man of vast family. He fathered over 100 children, his household, a nation unto itself. His chief queen, Nefertari, was honored with a magnificent tomb in the Valley of the Queens, and a temple at Abu Simbel, her likeness carved beside his own rare recognition of a queen's importance. Ramses was a master of legacy. He ensured his name appeared on monuments built by earlier kings, sometimes even carving his own inscriptions over theirs. He wanted the future to remember him above all others. And indeed we do. His mummy, discovered in the 19th century, reveals a man with strong features, reddish hair, and the marks of long age. He lived into his 90s, a span extraordinary for his time. As you rest, imagine walking beneath the vast columns of Karnak, each bearing his name, or standing at Abu Simbel as the rising sun illuminates his statue. Ramses's ambition was boundless, his works immense. Through stone, through words, through sheer will, he sought to defeat time itself, and in many ways, he succeeded. For thousands of years later, we still whisper his name, Ramses the Great. Even within Ramses II's magnificent reign, shadows of rivalry lingered. His household was vast, filled with wives, children, and courtiers, and beneath its glitter lay the quiet pulse of ambition. Among his queens, two figures stand out: Nefertari the beloved and Isat-Nofret the rival. Nefertari held the honored title of Great Royal Wife. She was celebrated for her beauty and wisdom, immortalized in inscriptions as the one for whom the sun shines. Ramses cherished her openly. He built for her one of the most splendid tombs in the Valley of the Queens, its walls painted with radiant scenes of her journey to the afterlife. At Abu Simbel, her temple stands beside his own, a rare sign of devotion in stone. Yet another queen shared the palace halls, Isat-Nofret. She too bore Ramses' sons, including Merenptah, who would one day succeed to the throne. Tensions simmered between the households of Nefertari and Isat-Nofret, each queen seeking to secure her children's futures. After Nefertari's death, her memory faced danger. In some temples, her image was deliberately hacked from walls, her likeness erased, as though she had never stood at Ramses' side. Whispers of conspiracy suggest that Isat-Nofret or her supporters may have been behind it. Nothing was proven yet. The silence of the chisels speaks loudly. To erase a name was to wound a soul. In the end, it was Isat-Nofret's son, Merenptah, who inherited the throne after Ramses' long life came to a close. Despite Nefertari's unrivaled position in her husband's heart, her lineage did not prevail. Power in the palace was never simply about affection. It was about survival, maneuvering, and patience. Such was the game of succession in Egypt. Even the most beloved queen could see her legacy endangered, her children overlooked, her memory scarred. Behind the grandeur of Ramses' reign, the palace was a place of whispers and chisels, of loyalty and rivalry etched into stone itself. As you settle into stillness, imagine the quiet halls of the palace after dusk, where painted walls once glowed with images of queens. Some remain bright, others bear scars where faces were struck away. In that silence lies the truth: love and rivalry walked side by side. And even in the age of the god-kings, memory itself could be reshaped by those who survived. Long before Ramses raised his temples and Akhenaten built his sunlit city, another king carved his mark into eternity. His name was Khufu, and his vision gave the world one of its greatest wonders, the Great Pyramid of Giza. Khufu ruled during the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom, around 2550 BCE. His father, Sneferu, had already pioneered pyramid building, experimenting with shapes and angles in the bent pyramid and the red pyramid. But Khufu looked upon those monuments and sought something greater, a tomb that would not only preserve him, but proclaim his majesty for all ages. The Great Pyramid rose from the plateau at Giza, a colossal structure of 2.3 million limestone blocks. Each block weighed several tons, yet together they formed a mountain of stone that soared 481 feet into the desert sky. For nearly 4,000 years, it remained the tallest man-made structure in the world. Even now, it dominates the horizon with silent authority. To the Egyptians, it was more than a tomb. It was a cosmic machine, its 4 sides aligned precisely to the cardinal points reflecting the order of the heavens. Its smooth limestone casing, now mostly lost, once gleamed white beneath the sun, a beacon of light guiding the king's soul upward. Within passages sloped and turned, leading to chambers deep inside the heart of the pyramid. The king's chamber, built of massive granite blocks, was sealed so tightly that even a sheet of papyrus could hardly slip between the stones. Here, Khufu's body would rest in a sarcophagus, surrounded by offerings to sustain him in the afterlife. But the pyramid itself was his true vessel, a stairway of stone channeling his spirit to join the gods among the stars. Inscriptions from the pyramid texts speak of the pharaoh ascending like a falcon soaring into the night sky to dwell forever with Ra. Standing before the Great Pyramid today, it is easy to forget the lives it consumed. Tens of thousands labored to raise it. Yet contrary to later tales, they were not slaves. Archaeology reveals that they were farmers, craftsmen, and masons called to work during the Nile's flood season, when their fields lay underwater. They lived in nearby workers' villages, their graves found close to the pyramid's base. They were fed bread, beer, and meat provisions far better than the average farmer's diet. They built not in chains, but in service to their god-king. Still, the work was grueling. Stones had to be quarried, dragged, and lifted by ingenious systems of ramps and levers. Accidents were common. Some workers died and were buried in the very shadow of the pyramid they had helped to raise. To Khufu, their sacrifice was part of the price of eternity, and yet in a way, their toil achieved what he dreamed. 4,500 years later, the pyramid still stands. Khufu's name carved on blocks deep within remains known. His body is lost, his treasures long gone, but his monument endures, dwarfing time itself. As you rest, imagine the silent desert night. The pyramid rises, its vast angles cutting into the starlit sky. The air is cool, the sand stretches endless, and one man's dream of immortality still stands eternal stone against the shifting sands. Behind the majesty of Khufu's pyramid lay the sweat and struggle of countless lives. To build eternity required human hands, hands blistered by stone shoulders, bent beneath weight, lives bound to labor under the desert sun. Archaeologists have uncovered the workers' village near Giza, revealing not misery, but a community. Small houses lined narrow streets, ovens baked bread, breweries filled jars with beer. Workers ate loaves, onions, and dried fish washed down with thick, nourishing beer. They were not treated as slaves, but as valued laborers essential to the pharaoh's vision. The labor was organized with military precision. Overseers, often nobles or trusted officials, commanded teams of hundreds. Below them, foremen directed smaller groups. Each team carved, dragged, and set stones in place, their progress carefully measured. Ramps of mud brick and rubble snaked upward, allowing blocks to be hauled higher as the pyramid rose. Chants and drums kept rhythm as ropes strained and stones shifted inch by inch. At the top, engineers ensured angles held true, that the sides aligned perfectly with the stars. Each layer brought the pyramid closer to completion. Each block laid another step toward Khufu's eternity. But the price was high. Injuries were common. Bones from workers' graves show fractures, arthritis, and worn joints, marks of heavy labor. Some died young, buried in modest graves near the monument. To the Egyptians, these burials were acts of honor. To rest in the pyramid's shadow was to share in its eternal purpose. Among the workers, pride likely mingled with hardship. They were building not only for their pharaoh, but for Egypt itself. Each stone was a statement that order and power prevailed, that their land and their gods would endure. To contribute to such a monument was to take part in something larger than life. The overseer of this vast endeavor was Khufu's cousin and vizier. He was architect, planner, and commander, directing thousands as if leading an army. His tomb near Giza honors him with titles, his role in shaping one of humanity's greatest works, remembered for eternity. Yet even for Hemiunu, the task was overwhelming. Delays, collapses, and deaths shadowed progress. The pyramid was completed only through relentless will, the will of one king who demanded that his stairway to the heavens be raised no matter the cost. And so beneath the grandeur lay the quiet truth: Egypt's eternity was built on human lives. Not lives forgotten, but lives woven into the stone. Their sweat became mortar, their songs echoes in the passages, their bones resting nearby. As you drift deeper, imagine the distant sound of chisels in the night, the groan of ropes, the murmur of tired voices. Above them, the pyramid grows higher, with each passing day a silent promise of eternity. The cost was heavy, but the monument endures, a testament to both the ambition of a king and the endurance of his people. Not all monuments to the pharaohs were built of stone. Some were built of flesh and blood. In the earliest dynasties of Egypt, the obsession with eternity took a darker form: retainer sacrifice. At Abydos, in the desert south of Cairo, archaeologists uncovered a tomb that revealed the chilling scale of this practice. It belonged to Pharaoh Jer of the First Dynasty. Within and around his burial enclosure, the remains of 318 men, women, and children lay arranged in neat rows. They were not common graves scattered by chance. They were deliberate burials aligned with solemn care. These were palace servants, guards, courtiers, the people who had attended the king in life. In death, they were expected to continue their service. Some bore signs of strangulation. Others showed blunt force trauma. A few were hastily mummified, their bodies preserved just enough to accompany their ruler into eternity. To later eyes, it seems cruel. But to the Egyptians of that age, it was part of the cosmic order. If the king was divine, then serving him beyond death was an honor. Priests taught that these retainers would share in the pharaoh's glory, moving with him into the afterlife as attendants, guards, and companions. Even animals were not spared. Dogs, cattle, and birds have been found buried alongside rulers, their lives offered to sustain the king's household in eternity. Later tombs would even contain wigs, carved figurines, and symbolic objects, substitutes for living servants. But in these early centuries, the belief demanded real lives sacrificed in silence. The sight of those rows at Abydos reminds us how far the pharaoh's power reached. His command did not end with breath. It extended beyond the grave, shaping not only his own destiny, but the fate of those around him. The practice faded by the end of the Old Kingdom, replaced by ushabti figurines, small statues believed to come alive in the afterlife and work in place of real servants. But the memory of sacrifice lingers in the sand, a haunting reminder of devotion carried to its most extreme end. As you rest, imagine the desert night over Abydos. Stars gleam above the ruins, silent witnesses to lives given long ago. In the stillness, one feels both awe and sorrow. For the pharaoh's immortality demanded more than stone. It demanded lives folded into eternity, like shadows into sand. Egypt endured for 3,000 years, but even divine kings were not immune to the tide of history. As the centuries passed, foreign powers turned their eyes to the Nile. One after another, they arrived: Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians. Each seized the throne, ruling in the name of the pharaohs, weaving themselves into Egypt's long story. Yet it was the arrival of Alexander the Great that transformed Egypt most profoundly. In 332 BCE, he swept into the land, welcomed as liberator from Persian rule. At Memphis, he was crowned pharaoh, adopting the double crown as though born to it. Soon after, he founded a new city by the sea, Alexandria. Alexandria grew swiftly into a beacon of Greek culture and learning. Its harbor bustled with ships, its library gathered knowledge from across the known world. Its lighthouse, the Pharos, rose over the waves, one of the wonders of antiquity. Though Alexander's reign was brief, his mark endured. After his death in 323 BCE, his general Ptolemy seized Egypt. From him sprang the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of rulers who held the throne for nearly 3 centuries. Though Macedonian by blood, they wrapped themselves in the robes of Egyptian tradition.
They built temples in the ancient style, carved hieroglyphs declaring their devotion to the gods, and even married their siblings to preserve divine blood. Yet they never ceased to be Greek. Their children bore Greek names, their palaces echoed with Greek speech, and their architects shaped Alexandria in Hellenistic forms. In this mingling of traditions, Egypt entered a new age neither fully Egyptian nor wholly foreign, but something between. Among their great works was the Temple of Horus at Edfu, soaring in traditional majesty. Another, the Temple of Isis at Philae, shimmered with carvings of gods both old and new. On coins, Ptolemaic rulers appeared as pharaohs, yet also as Hellenistic kings, straddling 2 worlds. Intrigue, however, never left their courts. Marriages between brothers and sisters multiplied, alliances shifted, and rivalries brewed. The dynasty produced queens of ambition and kings of weakness, their lives, a tapestry of splendor and turmoil. This era brought Egypt into the wider Mediterranean world, binding it to Greece and Rome. Yet through it all, the pharaonic legacy endured. Even foreign rulers found it necessary to wear the double crown, to present themselves as sons of Horus, to walk in rituals older than memory. As you drift into calm, imagine the harbor of Alexandria at dusk, ships rocking gently, the lighthouse fire blazing against the sky. Egypt was no longer only the land of the Nile, but part of a vast web of cultures. Still beneath the Greek marble and foreign tongues, the heartbeat of the pharaohs continued steady as the river itself. The Ptolemaic dynasty was a world of splendor, but also of turbulence. Greek in origin, Egyptian in rule, the Ptolemies walked a narrow path between 2 cultures. Their courts glittered with marble colonnades, scrolls of learning, and temples adorned with hieroglyphs. Yet behind the facades lay rivalries as sharp as any blade. Berenice, the second wife of Ptolemy III, left one of the more curious stories. When her husband departed for war in 246 BCE, she vowed to the goddess Aphrodite that she would cut off her long, shining hair if he returned safely. True to her word, she placed her offering in a temple when he came home. Soon after, the hair vanished. To soothe the queen's distress, the court astronomer claimed that the goddess had been so moved that she placed Berenice's hair among the stars. Thus, the constellation Coma Berenices was born, a myth of loyalty and loss, woven into the sky itself. Such tales mingled with darker realities. When Ptolemy IV died in 204 BCE, his young son Ptolemy VII was crowned king, a child of barely 6 years. His mother, Arsinoe III, should have guided him, but regents hungry for power had her murdered. The people outraged at the betrayal rose in fury, stormed the palace, and tore the conspirators limb from limb. In the end, the boy king was left not as a divine ruler above all, but as a frightened child amidst chaos. The dynasty's incestuous marriages continued binding siblings together in sacred yet perilous unions. Queens plotted brothers, schemed cousins, rose against cousins. Cleopatra III was said to have orchestrated the death of her own sister Arsinoe with Avathor to secure her claim. Court life was a glittering facade of banquets and processions, but beneath it flowed a current of fear and ambition. And yet the Ptolemies also nurtured knowledge. The Library of Alexandria reached its height in this era, filled with scrolls from across the known world, treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Priests compiled records of Egypt's past, shaping the dynastic lists still used today. Dream books cataloged visions. Figs eaten in sleep meant wealth. Fire meant danger. Drowning meant transformation. In these records, we glimpse how Egyptians sought to read meaning from the mysteries of night. So, the Ptolemaic age was both fragile and grand. Legends shone among the stars, while intrigue brewed in the palace. Egypt stood at a crossroads, Greek-Egyptian, and soon Roman. Through it all, the throne remained gilded, but those who sat upon it knew well how dangerous its weight could be. As you rest, imagine Alexandria's night sky, the lighthouse burning bright, and a constellation shimmering faintly above the hair of a queen cut in devotion, placed forever in the heavens. In Egypt, even love and sacrifice could become immortal. From the Ptolemaic line arose its most famous figure, a queen, whose name still stirs echoes, Cleopatra VII, last of the pharaohs. Her life was a tapestry of brilliance and tragedy, woven at the very end of Egypt's ancient story. Cleopatra came to the throne in 51 BCE, ruling beside her younger brother Ptolemy III. Like many of her ancestors, she was both sister and wife to him, though the bond was more political than affectionate. Soon their alliance fractured into rivalry. Amid the turmoil, Rome entered the stage, its influence spreading like shadow across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra was no ordinary queen. She spoke 9 languages, commanded knowledge of science and philosophy, and wielded charm with skill. Where her ancestors leaned heavily on Greek culture, she embraced Egyptian tradition, more deeply presenting herself as the living goddess, Isis, mother and protector of the land. Her reign entwined with Rome's mightiest men. When Julius Caesar marched into Egypt, she aligned herself with him. Legends tell of her being smuggled into his presence, rolled in a carpet, emerging to captivate him with wit and presence. Their alliance secured her throne, and from it was born a son, Caesarion, whom she declared heir. After Caesar's death, she turned to Mark Antony. Together they forged a union of power and passion, ruling Egypt and seeking to shape Rome's destiny. Their love became legend, celebrated and condemned, a tale of 2 rulers, bound together against the tide. But Rome was not forgiving. Octavian, later Augustus, rose against them. At Actium, their fleet was defeated. Retreat turned to ruin. Antony fell by his own hand, believing Cleopatra already gone. Soon after, she too chose her end. Tradition says it came by the bite of an asp pressed to her skin in her final chamber. With her death in 30 BCE, Egypt's long line of pharaohs ended. The land became a Roman province. The crown worn for 3,000 years by god-kings and queens was set aside forever. Yet Cleopatra's memory did not fade. Romans painted her as seductress and schemer, but history has also preserved her as strategist, linguist, and leader. She was the last flame of Egypt's ancient sovereignty, a queen who stood against the weight of empire. As you drift into stillness, imagine the cool waters of the Nile flowing past Alexandria. In the palace, Cleopatra gazes from her window, aware that the world is shifting. The gods of Egypt still linger in temples, but Rome's shadow falls long. She is the last to wear the crown of Horus and Isis. With her, the pharaohs pass into memory. Yet her name endures, whispered like a spell, echoing across centuries. Each day in the life of a pharaoh began not with leisure but with ceremony. For the Egyptians, the king was not simply a ruler. He was the earthly form of Horus, the falcon god, and his very presence ensured the balance of the cosmos. From sunrise to sunset, his hours were woven into a pattern of ritual. At dawn, servants and priests entered his chamber. He was washed in water drawn from the Nile, perfumed with oils of myrrh and lotus. Linen garments fine and white were wrapped about him. Crowns and jewelry, each charged with symbolic power, were placed carefully one by one. Even cosmetics held meaning. Black coal lined the eyes believed to ward off evil and glare alike. The pharaoh's body was not merely clothed, it was armed with symbols. The crook and flail the scepters, the amulets all declared that this man bore the divine essence. Each morning his transformation was renewed, as if he were reborn alongside the rising sun. Breakfast was modest breadfruit, perhaps beer or wine. Soon after his day turned to duty, he moved to temples, vast complexes filled with priests and incense. There he performed offerings to the gods, libations poured, food set upon altars, prayers recited in ancient cadences. These acts were not symbolic alone. The Egyptians believed that the favor of the gods depended upon the pharaoh's constant attention. If he faltered, famine or chaos might follow. In councils he received advisors. Matters of law, trade, and tribute passed before him. His word carried the weight of divine decree. To govern was not just administration, it was an extension of cosmic order ma'at. Each judgment, each command reinforced harmony between the heavens and the earth. Ceremonies filled his days. Festivals marked the turning of seasons. Processions carried him through Thebes or Memphis crowds, prostrating musicians filling the air with hymns. The sight of the pharaoh was rare, reserved for moments of solemnity. His presence, gilded in regalia, was meant to remind the people that a god walked among them. And yet even such a god found time for leisure. Some rulers hunted in marshes, their arrows flashing against sunlight. Others competed in chariot races or archery feats meant to show vigor. Banquets brought music and dance, the flicker of lamps, the taste of figs and honey. But even in these moments, the role of God-King did not loosen. Every action was charged with meaning. To hunt was to reenact the battle against chaos. To feast was to mirror divine abundance. To play senate was to rehearse the journey of the soul. The pharaoh could never simply be a man. So passed his days waking, washing, ruling, worshipping, until evening fell and rituals of protection closed the night. The cycle turned with the sun unending, unchanging, a life more sacred performance than private freedom. As you rest now, imagine the quiet corridors of a palace at dawn. Servants move softly, priests whisper hymns, the rising sun glows upon polished stone. In that rhythm, the pharaoh awakens once more, not only to rule a kingdom, but to uphold the balance of the world itself. For all its majesty, the crown was heavy. To wear it was to live within a cage, golden yet confining. The pharaoh's life was bound by tradition, ritual, and constant expectation. Behind the splendor lay a burden few could endure with ease. At court he was surrounded by family advisors and attendants. Each had ambitions, alliances, and fears. Rival princes lingered in the background, their eyes on the throne. Queens and concubines wove webs of influence, pressing for their children's futures. Nobles and priests measured their loyalty against their power. Assassination was not unknown. Some pharaohs met sudden ends, their deaths whispered as poison or plot. Others fell in battle, their bodies returned shrouded. Even those who ruled long years could not escape the weight of envy or fear. Superstition added to the pressure. Sorcerers were believed to cast curses. Rivals might enlist priests or magicians to summon misfortune. To guard against unseen dangers, pharaohs wore amulets carved with spells, rings, etched with protection and charms against evil. Their food was tested, their chambers warded with incantations. The people themselves, though reverent, could turn. A failed harvest, a flood too high or too low. Disease sweeping through villages, any might be seen as a sign that the pharaoh had lost divine favor. The same crowds who bowed in awe could rise in fury. Thus the ruler who seemed most powerful was also most vulnerable. He lived, constantly watched his words scrutinized, his actions magnified. The palace shimmered with beauty, but its walls also held tension. Each day was a performance, each decision carrying consequences that stretched from heaven to earth. And beyond all, death loomed. The pharaoh, though godlike, was still mortal. Illness, accident, and age stalked him as they did any man. To prepare for the afterlife was to acknowledge that his power had limits, that one day his crown would rest upon another's head. In this way, the pharaoh was both exalted and imprisoned, honored above all, yet trapped in a role that demanded constant vigilance. His cage was adorned with gold, but its bars were strong. As you drift deeper, picture the quiet of a palace chamber. Jewels glimmer in the lamplight, guards stand at the door, amulets rest beside the bed. Yet behind all splendor a man lies awake thinking of enemies, of omens, of the weight he cannot set down. In Egypt, even a god-king was never truly free. The throne of Egypt was meant to pass like the sun, steady from one day to the next, yet in practice succession was rarely smooth. Behind the grandeur of coronations lay rivalries, whispers, and sometimes blood. The pharaoh often had many wives. His great royal wife held honor, but other queens and concubines also bore children, each with a claim to the royal bloodline. Without a fixed rule of primogeniture, disputes were common. Brothers, uncles, and cousins maneuvered, each hoping the gods and the court would favor them. At times, succession was clear. A crown prince trained from youth might step smoothly into power, yet often shadows gathered. A sudden death, a queen's ambition, or a priest's alliance could tilt the balance. In some cases, heirs died mysteriously before they could rule. In others, young kings took the throne only to be guided or controlled by regents. One tale whispers of a plot within Ramses III's harem. A secondary wife, Taye, sought to place her son Pentawere on the throne instead of the chosen heir. Papyrus records describe trials, conspirators, and executions. Even within the palace, ambition turned deadly. Tutankhamun, too, may have been a victim of rivalry. His young death left Egypt unstable, and some scholars suspect he was murdered to clear the path for his advisor and successor. Whether true or not, the mystery reflects the constant tension the throne was coveted, and few paths to it were clean. Even when succession succeeded, strife remained. Relatives excluded from power could stir unrest. Nobles with wealth and soldiers with loyalty could shift the balance, pressing their weight upon the fragile crown. Thus the pharaoh, though supreme, lived within a family of shifting loyalties. His own kin could be allies or threats. The palace that glittered with incense and song could at night echo with plots. As you rest now, picture the darkened halls of a palace. Torches flicker. In one chamber, a queen whispers plans for her son. In another, priests weigh omens of succession. In the silence, the future of Egypt trembles. Succession was not only destiny, it was contest, sharp as the edge of a blade. For all their power on earth, the pharaohs looked always toward death. Life was but a prelude, eternity awaited. From the moment a king placed the double crown upon his head, preparations for the afterlife began. The Egyptians believed that the soul lived on after death, but only if the body was preserved and provisions secured. For the pharaoh, this belief became an obsession. His tomb was not merely a grave, it was a machine of immortality built to carry his soul into the realm of the gods. Construction began early. Vast tombs and mortuary temples rose under his orders, sometimes taking decades to complete. Every wall bore inscriptions, hymns, spells, maps of the afterlife. Every chamber stored goods for eternity, chests of clothing, vessels of wine, tools, jewelry, food enough for a king. At the heart of it all lay the mummy. The body had to endure, for without it the soul could not find its vessel. The embalming took 70 days, organs removed, and dried the body wrapped in linen, layer upon layer, each bound with amulets. Golden masks were placed over faces, idealized images of divine perfection. The tomb itself mirrored the cosmos. Corridors twisted like the paths of night, ceilings painted with stars, walls alive with gods guiding the king. Pyramids rose on the plateau. Later, kings carved tombs deep into cliffs at Thebes. All were fortresses against time, though even the strongest walls could not always bar thieves. Some rulers went further. In the earliest times, they demanded companions in death. Retainers, servants, even animals were sacrificed to serve the king in eternity. Later, Ushabti figurines replaced living attendants, small statues meant to rise and work in the afterlife. In this, the pharaoh's need remained constant to be served forever. Why such obsession? Because to the Egyptians, the pharaoh was no mere man. He was divine. His soul was destined to merge with the gods, to sail across the sky with Ra, to preside among Osiris and the judges of the dead. Eternity was not choice but duty. To fail in preparation was to risk disorder for all Egypt. Yet this devotion came at great cost. Wealth and labor poured into tombs instead of fields. Thousands toiled in quarries, chiseling blocks that would never house the living. Generations spent their lives ensuring that one man's death would echo forever. Still, the obsession endures in stone. We walk today through the pyramids of Giza, through the Valley of the Kings, through temples carved with stars and hymns. Their walls whisper of fear and faith of kings who could not accept that even a god-king was mortal. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the flicker of a torch in a tomb passage. Painted walls glow with images of Ra's golden bark. The air is thick with incense. Somewhere deeper lies the king wrapped in linen waiting. His preparations are complete, his obsession fulfilled. Death for him was only the beginning. The heart of Egypt's afterlife belief was not only the tomb, but the body itself. To endure forever, the pharaoh's form had to be preserved, transformed into a vessel fit for eternity. Thus arose the sacred art of mummification, a practice both scientific and spiritual, both practical and divine. When a king died, or even before his passing, preparations began. Priests known as embalmers carried out the rites. They worked in hidden workshops along the Nile places, thick with the scent of resin and incense. Secrecy cloaked their labor, for they dealt with mysteries of flesh and spirit. First came purification. The body was washed in water drawn from the Nile, the river of life itself. Then the embalmers removed the internal organs. The stomach, lungs, liver, and intestines were placed in canopic jars, each guarded by a protective deity. The heart seat of thought and emotion was sometimes left within, for it would be weighed in the judgment of the dead. The body was then packed with natron salt, a dry mineral from desert lakes. For 40 days or more it rested, moisture drawn away until only a husk remained. This was not decay, but transformation. The corpse dried and hardened, became something new, a body no longer mortal but eternal. Afterward, sacred oil softened the skin. Priests wrapped the body in linen strips layer upon layer. Amulets were tucked between wrappings. The Eye of Horus for protection, the scarab for rebirth, the Ankh for life eternal. Priests recited spells as each bandage was tied, their words binding magic into cloth. A mask of gold shaped in the king's likeness covered the face. Eyes of obsidian and quartz gave the appearance of eternal watchfulness. Beneath the layers of linen and resin, the pharaoh was no longer man, but God, ready to walk into the halls of eternity. The ritual was more than preservation. It was rebirth. Spells from the Book of the Dead guided the soul. Ceremonies opened the mouth of the mummy, allowing breath and speech in the afterlife. Incense filled the air, drums beat softly, priests chanted through the night. The process lasted 70 days, mirroring cosmic cycles, echoing the sun's passage and Osiris's renewal. Each gesture, each prayer was part of a cosmic drama. The body became an eternal house for the Ka, the vital essence, and the Ba, the roaming soul, ensuring both could reunite forever. As you rest, imagine the dim light of oil lamps flickering over white linen. Priests whisper spells, hands steady as they wrap. The air is warm with resin, heavy with silence. A king lies transformed, ready to rise in worlds beyond. Through ritual and care, death has been remade into eternity. The tombs of the pharaohs were not simple graves. They were entire worlds built to serve as eternal homes, filled with the necessities of life and the symbols of power. In their chambers, kings sought not rest but continuation, as though death itself could be outwitted by architecture. Early rulers built pyramids, mountains of stone rising toward the sky. Later dynasties carved tombs deep into cliffs, hidden in valleys, their entrances concealed from robbers. But whether soaring above the desert or buried within it, the purpose was the same: to create a city for eternity. Inside corridors wound like rivers, leading deeper into silence. Walls glowed with painted scenes, the pharaoh hunting in marshes, sailing the Nile, feasting beneath lotus garlands. These were not mere memories. They were spells ensuring that what was painted would exist forever in the afterlife. Chambers held treasures both humble and grand. Beds of carved wood chairs inlaid with ivory, boxes of jewelry, weapons of bronze and gold. Jars of wine, baskets of bread, dried fish and figs were packed for meals beyond death. Even games like sonnet were included so the king could play as his soul wandered. Animals, too, were present: mummified cats, dogs, birds, even cattle. They would provide companionship and sustenance. In some tombs, miniature boats awaited, ready to sail the celestial Nile. In others, model granaries and workshops stood so the pharaoh would always have bread, always have workers. The most vital of all were the inscriptions. Hymns, prayers, and maps of the underworld guided the soul through dangers. Serpents' gates, rivers of fire, all were depicted along with spells to overcome them. These texts carved in hieroglyphs were blueprints of eternity. Each tomb was guarded. Traps, false corridors, and hidden doors tried to mislead intruders. Priests sealed chambers with curses against those who might disturb. Yet time and greed often prevailed, and many tombs were looted. Still enough survived to reveal their grandeur. Tutankhamun's tomb, though modest compared to others, gave us a glimpse of the splendor. Gold shrines nested within one another, treasures gleamed in candlelight, and the famous golden mask rested upon the boy king's face. If such wealth was buried with a minor pharaoh, one can only imagine the lost riches of greater kings. The Valley of the Kings itself became a city of tombs, each hidden in the cliffs of Thebes. Here the rulers of the new kingdom lay, their walls alive with stars and gods. Even today, when we walk their corridors, the silence feels heavy, as though eternity itself still lingers. For the pharaohs, these tombs were more than resting places. They were proof that death was not the end. To step into them was to step into another life, one that mirrored the Nile but flowed forever. As you drift deeper, imagine entering a cool chamber, the air still after millennia. Painted walls glow in lamplight, boats sailing, gods watching the pharaoh standing tall. Around you, treasures slumber in the dust. This is not a grave. It is a city where eternity waits, silent yet alive. For all the labor, devotion, and wealth poured into them, the tombs of the pharaohs were rarely safe. Time and greed conspired against them. Even the strongest walls and deepest passages could not always shield the treasures within. From the earliest dynasties, tomb robbers lurked. Driven by hunger or ambition, they dug through sand and stone, slipping past guards and curses alike. Gold, jewels, and fine goods fetched fortune. Even sacred mummies were stripped, their wrappings torn, their bones scattered. Priests sometimes tried to resist. In the late New Kingdom, they gathered royal mummies from looted tombs and hid them together in secret caches at Deir el-Bahri. Here, pharaohs who had once ruled in splendor lay side by side, wrapped again, concealed, to escape further violation. Yet even these caches were eventually uncovered, their silent occupants disturbed once more. By the Greco-Roman period, many pyramids and tombs already stood empty, their treasures long stolen. Travelers walked among ruins, unaware of the grandeur once sealed within. Sand and silence covered the traces of eternity. Centuries passed, then in modern times the tombs were rediscovered. Archaeologists brushed away dust and stone lantern light flickering on painted walls unseen for thousands of years. The most famous discovery came in 1922 when Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun. Behind sealed doors lay shrines, couches shaped like animals, and the golden mask that now gazes from museum glass. The world marveled, but it also remembered the fragile line between reverence and disturbance. For though rediscovery revealed wonders, it also meant intrusion. Tombs designed to remain sealed for eternity were open to eyes and air. Some artifacts crumbled, some colors faded. The paradox remains: to preserve, we must also uncover. And so the fate of tombs has always been uncertain. Some endured untouched, hidden by chance. Others were stripped bare, their treasures lost forever. Yet even in ruin, they still speak. Empty chambers, broken sarcophagi, shattered seals, all remind us of the pharaoh's relentless hope to outwit death, and of death's quiet certainty. As you drift deeper, imagine walking with a torch through a corridor long forgotten. Dust falls softly. The air smells of stone and time. Before you lies a sealed door, its plaster unbroken. Behind it waits silence and a story yet untold. If tombs could be robbed and bodies decay, how then could the pharaohs achieve their dream of immortality? The answer lay not only in stone, but in memory. For the Egyptians, to speak a name was to give it life. As long as a pharaoh's name was carved on temple walls, as long as hymns recited his deeds, he endured. Oblivion came only when memory faded, when chisels erased names, when voices ceased. To preserve legacy was as vital as preserving flesh. Some rulers worked tirelessly at this. Ramses II filled Egypt with his image, ensuring no traveler could forget him. Hatshepsut built monuments that declared her right to rule. Akhenaten, though erased, was later remembered through the ruins of Amarna. Tutankhamun, nearly forgotten, was restored by the chance survival of his tomb. Even failure spoke. The deliberate erasure of a name was itself a kind of memory, a mark of how deeply the ruler had stirred his age. To be hated, remembered as the enemy, was still to linger in the record of time. Beyond stone, memory endured in story. Priests and scribes recorded chronicles, lists of dynasties, hymns of praise. Myths grew around certain rulers, blending history and legend. Cleopatra became not just queen, but archetype of allure. Ramses became the pharaoh of Exodus in later traditions, his identity blurred, yet his presence eternal. Today, we carry their legacy in museums and books and classrooms and documentaries. Their faces gaze from statues, their voices whisper in hieroglyphs. Each discovery renews them. Each retelling, each gaze upon a mask or carving gives them another breath of immortality. And so, in a sense, the pharaohs succeeded. Their bodies may crumble, their treasures scatter, but their stories endure. We still speak their names. We still marvel at their ambition. We still ask what it meant to live as gods on earth. As you sink toward rest, imagine the desert at twilight, the pyramids casting long shadows across the sand. They stand not just as tombs, but as memories carved against the sky. Long after their builders passed, they still whisper, "Remember us." And in remembering, we grant them the very immortality they sought. For all their golden crowns and towering monuments, the pharaohs were not so different from us. Their lives were framed in ritual and power, yet beneath the regalia beat human hearts marked by ambition, fear, love, and frailty. In their stories, we glimpse mirrors of ourselves. Some were visionaries, dreaming of cities, temples, and pyramids that would outlast time. Others were conquerors, leading armies into deserts and across seas. Still, others were reformers like Akhenaten, who dared to reshape belief itself. Each reflects the eternal human drive to build, to change, to leave a mark. Yet they were also vulnerable. Tutankhamun's bones showed deformities, illnesses born of close bloodlines. Ramses II, though mighty, aged and stooped. Cleopatra, brilliant and proud, met her end in despair. For all their claims to godhood, they could not escape pain or loss. They quarreled within families as siblings and cousins vied for succession. They loved and grieved, raising children, burying them too soon, building tombs for wives and queens whose names still glow on painted walls. Their triumphs were vast, but so were their sorrows. In them we see the paradox of humanity to reach for the heavens while still bound to earth. They stood as gods in the eyes of their people, but in private moments they must have known hunger, weariness, fear of betrayal, and dread of death. Their glory was real, but so too was their fragility. Perhaps this is why their story lingers. We do not only marvel at their pyramids, we recognize something of our own reflection within them. Their dreams were ours, magnified by scale and circumstance. Their flaws were ours, carried on a stage lit by desert sun. As you rest, imagine the statues of pharaohs that line museums and temples. Their faces are calm, eternal, unchanging. Yet behind the stone once lived men and women who laughed, wept, and hoped. The pharaohs remind us that even those called divine are at heart profoundly human. The story of the pharaohs stretches across 3,000 years, yet even now it does not feel distant. Their pyramids still rise against the horizon. Their mummies still lie in silent halls. Their names still echo in our speech. Time has not erased them. They remind us of ambition's heights. A single king commanded stones heavier than elephants to be lifted into place, shaping a mountain that still stands. Another filled entire valleys with temples' columns like forests of stone. Another dared to defy the gods of his ancestors, proclaiming a new vision of divinity. They also remind us of mortality's shadow. For all their wealth and armies, they could not halt illness, accident, or betrayal. Their tombs were robbed, their names erased, their dynasties overthrown. Yet even in defeat they sought immortality, and in memory they achieved it. The pharaohs teach us that power is never simple. It is glory and burden, freedom and cage. To be revered as a god was to be bound to duty, to walk each day beneath the weight of expectation. To wear the crown was to bear both splendor and isolation. And perhaps most of all, they remind us of the human longing to endure. Each of us in smaller ways builds our own monuments, words, deeds, families, dreams. The pharaohs built theirs in stone and gold. We build ours in memory, kindness, and legacy. All are ways of saying, remember me. As you drift into the quiet of night, imagine the desert under stars. The pyramids rise dark against the horizon. Wind whispers over sand. Somewhere beneath, in chambers carved millennia ago, kings still lie wrapped in linen waiting. And above in the vast sky, constellations shine, some shaped by queens' sacrifices, some named by ancient watchers. The pharaohs are gone, yet not lost. Their story endures because we continue to tell it. In that telling, they live again, teaching us about power, about fragility, about the eternal search for meaning. So let us close this long journey gently. The Nile still flows. The pyramids still stand. And in your quiet rest, the voices of the pharaohs echo softly, not as gods above us, but as fellow humans reaching through time. Sleep now with their story as a lullaby, a tale of ambition, of wonder, of the endless desert night, and of the simple truth that to be remembered is to live forever,